Hello everyone, this is Danny Sancouli, also known as the Lightninja, and this is the second video in my Lightroom preset editing tutorial series. Okay, so this video is a little bit interesting. I just started my YouTube channel and these editing tutorials, and the main reason for this first series is to accompany the preset pack that I just released. And I just made a video that talked a little bit about how to apply my presets to images and then to further edit them in Lightroom. When I developed these presets initially, I started to think, how can people benefit best from using presets? Because there's so many presets on the market, and I think people have expectations that they purchase these presets, they apply them to any photo, whether or not it's a night photo, an iPhone or cell phone photo, whatever it is, and then they expect them to look good. But that's just not the reality of presets. Now, with that said, I'm not saying presets are bad. I really do think they are valuable tools. I think they're especially valuable for the beginning photographer who has just gotten into it, because when you start photography, there are so many things to learn. You have to learn camera settings, you have to learn how to expose for photos properly, and then to put on top of that, learning how to use these new software programs like Lightroom or Photoshop or others. It's just a lot of things to do at once. And so when I first started photography, I really liked Lightroom presets, because once you apply a preset to an image, it does give it a characteristic look. And that is really the valuable tool of using presets, especially for the photographer who's just starting out. So I decided I wanted to put together a series of videos that helps people get started with these Lightroom presets. And one of the things I wanted to cover is how to use presets with images that are not exposed for properly. Believe it or not, before making this video, I did do a little research online just to make sure there wasn't another method that I was missing. And the problem is, presets, the ones that I designed and a lot of presets on the market, aren't there to correctly expose for your image. The reason why is, let me just show you by example. So here is my Lightroom library. This is a folder of images that I've been using to design these presets and produce some examples. And so I have this image up here. So let's get this image full sized. So this is an image that's straight out of camera. It's a raw image, and so there was no in-camera edits applied. And if you just look, it's obviously not exposed for properly. The foreground is very much underexposed and the sky is overexposed. And the reason for that is because in a situation like this, nowadays with digital cameras, you have to decide what you're going to expose for. And you really, in my opinion, I always expose towards underexposing images, because especially with my Nikon D750 and a lot of modern digital cameras, the shadows are so easy to recover detail, but with a blown out sky, you're never going to recover that. It can do pretty well in some instances, but it's in my experience, it's harder to bring back detail from overexposed images compared to underexposed. But besides that, for this image, I chose to sort of underexpose the foreground so I didn't lose detail in the sky. And so why I'm talking about all this is because this actually happens to be a common way people shoot nowadays. So if you shoot like this and then you want to use presets, the issue becomes the presets are really not that effective, or they're not most effective when you apply them to a photo that is not exposed for properly. So let me just show you. Let's get into the editing portion. This isn't a video on how to use Lightroom to edit photos. There's tons of resources online, and so I hope you know that. So for this photo, what I'm going to do is just quickly bring down the highlights, to bring back some details and colors in the sky, and then bring up the shadows to bring up the exposure in the foreground. And that looks great to me. So the first point I want to make is my presets and a lot of other presets, they're not going to dramatically affect the exposure. And that's actually a good thing, because what makes a preset a valuable tool is if it can be applied to a wide range of photos. And if you make a preset that is simply going to, bring down an overexposed sky, well, then that preset is only going to work for a limited number of photos. So the idea is, if the photo is exposed for properly, whether you did it in camera or do it in a software program, then once you apply the presets, whatever they are, they're going to have a better effect. It would be nice if Lightroom gave you a way where you could do these global edits, somehow save them, and then apply a preset that just is sort of like adds the new settings from the preset to the ones that are already existing. But that just is not how it works. How Lightroom works is, once you apply a preset, so let's go down to my preset pack, and you find one that looks pretty good, and this is after doing the primary exposure edits. This looks good, so you apply that, and then what happens is it reverts basically any setting that was in that preset. So now if we select a preset and apply it, well, what happens is once the preset's applied, it's going to get rid of any changes that you just made, especially if the preset was designed to change that setting. So that isn't that big of an issue if you are sure you want to use a certain preset on an image. So for instance, with this image, if I took it, brought it into Lightroom, and I was just sure I wanted to use my preset that's called Sunset Urban, then I could apply the preset and then go and adjust for the highlights a little bit and the shadows. And this is what I had done previously, and then that works great. So that's the easiest method to get around an image that is not exposed properly if you want to use presets. But here is one of the issues. I released 14 presets in this pack, and maybe you have other presets, you have your own, you've purchased other preset packs, and if you want to try a bunch of presets on an image, it just gets kind of annoying to have to. So let's say I liked the result from this, but I wanted to check another one. Okay, here, let's do this preset. Well, then what you have to do is you have to again go back and bring up the shadows. You have to do those global adjustments again. And if you do this for every preset that you choose, it just takes a long time. So in order to speed up your editing process and really take advantage of presets, what I would recommend is, if you find a photo if you go on a photo shoot and you have a photo that you really like and you want to edit, what I do is in my Lightroom library, I always create folders, new folders that I call Photoshop projects or Lightroom projects. And then what you can do is you can keep photos in that library or in that folder that you're going to continue to manipulate and then send to print or publish on social media. So I'm going to show you a couple of methods on how you could do that, and just I think this video is kind of going to talk a little bit about how I actually go about doing my edits and organize my photos and stuff. And it may not work for everyone, and that's totally fine, but it's just this is how I do it, so maybe it will be helpful for some people. Okay, so now I'm going to show you two methods that you can deal with a photo that's not properly exposed and then use a bunch of presets on it. So let's go back to our library, let's go to our original photo, let's reset it, reset all the settings. So the first method is going to be using Photoshop as an external editor. If you don't have Photoshop, go ahead and skip to the second method. If you do have Photoshop, first what you do in Lightroom is you correct for those global changes that you wanted to do. So I'm going to bring down the highlights, bring up the shadows, and that looks good. Then all you do is right click, edit in Photoshop, and it's going to open it up in Photoshop. And you can do some edits in Photoshop, you can actually do whatever you want. This is actually how I do all my composites and editing, is I will move from Lightroom to Photoshop back and forth. And so that's actually something you should get used to doing if you really want to edit photos. But for this tutorial, the only purpose we're bringing into Photoshop is really just to create a copy, a TIFF copy of that edited photo. So once you're in Photoshop, you don't have to do any edits. You can just then save it. So I'm just gonna, on a Windows, hit Control Save. You could also just File Save. And what that's gonna do is, if you go back to the Lightroom library, it's now gonna save that edited file that you had brought into Photoshop as a TIFF file. So here's your original RAW, and then it saves that TIFF. So if I would have done edits in Photoshop and then saved it, it would have also saved those additional edits. But all I was doing was creating this TIFF duplicate. And so now, once you're back in Lightroom, you can start editing this with the presets. So let's go to the one that I selected at the beginning. Let's select it. And if you go to the library, let's compare that to, so the one on the left, this is the raw image applying the preset, and on the one on the right is the image that we had already corrected for the exposure. And you can see a big difference. The preset has much more of an effect. And again, the big benefit of this is now what you can do is, let's say you weren't right about that preset, you didn't like it, you wanted to try some other ones. Oh, this one looks pretty cool. Well, now you can try these other presets and actually get the full effect of them without having to go and change all these individual settings on each single time you want to try a new preset. Okay, now I'm going to show you the last method, and this one is the most complicated, but I think it's going to be a good introduction, especially if you want to start doing more edits to your photos and just being able to become more comfortable with managing files and organizing your photos with Lightroom and on your hard drive. Okay, so let's go back to the original image. Let's reset it, and just so we don't get confused, I'm going to delete this image that we had been working with. So all we have is the original image. Okay, so this is going to be several steps, but what you can do is open up your hard drive, and you can put it anywhere on your hard drive. I have a bunch of hard drives, but you somewhere on a hard drive you will create a new folder. I'm just going to call this one Lightroom Projects. And so you have to know where you created it. And then, so that's the first step. Then you go into Lightroom, you go to your image that you're going to edit, and you do those edits. So this one was just bringing down the highlights, bringing up the shadows. Now you right click on the image, go to Export, and in the Export Settings window, you can specify the folder that you're gonna send this image to. And so you go locate that new folder that you made. In my case, I called it Lightroom Presets. Select the folder, and if you want it even from here, after you make sure that the file setting is selected as TIFF, there's no compression, don't resize it, so you want to keep it at its native resolution. Down here for the resolution setting, 300 pixels per inch. But once you've selected the folder, then just hit Export. Now in Lightroom, if you go to the library, however you have it organized, but whenever you import your photos into Lightroom, they're going to come up over here on the left. You just go up to this plus icon and add folder. So rather than add subfolder, you want to add a folder, and then you go and locate the folder that you had just made and exported that image to. Select folder, and now it's going to, if you just click import, it's going to import that folder and the photo into your iPhone or into your Lightroom library. So if you go over here on the left, now you're going to see that Lightroom projects folder that you made and then that image. So although that was a lot of steps, now what you can do, for instance, the next photo that you want to edit with the presets, you can just export it to that same folder, import it back into Lightroom, and just really have another folder where you do all these creative edits with. And so although at first it seems like a lot of steps, it's actually not that complicated once you get the hang of it. And like if you look at my Lightroom, I have 7 of these Photoshop project folders, and each one of them has all these different multiple copies of images, and that's just how I do it. And it's not the most organized way, but I actually think it helps me stay organized, because then I can just kind of remember, well, was that like 2 months ago? That must have been whatever. And you can go ahead and organize them however you want, but the main thing is to be able to create these extra folders to edit images. So quickly, once that's there, well then now you can go and apply the presets and try other different presets to see which one you like. So in conclusion, if you have images that are not exposed for properly, there are 3 ways you can go about using these presets. First, you can apply the preset and then additionally edit in Lightroom by increasing exposure or whatever you need to do. But again, then you have to do that with each preset that you choose. The next way is to import it into import it into Photoshop and then back into Lightroom and save it, which will save it as a TIFF file, and then you can edit it. And then the last method was to export it from Lightroom as a TIFF and then re-import it into a different folder and then apply the presets at that point. So hopefully this video made sense. Again, like I said, there weren't a lot of resources online of other ways to get around this what I would call an editing flaw in Lightroom, where you can't sort of just temporarily save settings and then add a preset onto it. I think that would be a real easy fix for Lightroom to add. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.